Welcome to our Zoom edition of Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. Thank you for joining us for our global outlook with a local view. I'm Leslie Ungar, your host today. We have long heard about the October surprise in presidential politics. The first week of October, and we've already had October surprises. Things keep unfolding so fast, the questions I prepared 5 days ago seem obsolete, and the questions I prepared 2 days ago also seem too old. Back when politics had a degree of normalcy, we'd have a presidential election every 4 years, and then things would go back to normal for 4 years until the next election. There has been little normal about the last 4 years of this president. Battle-weary, early voting has started in Ohio and many states around the country. We have invited back to the Forum 360 Dr. and Director David Cohen, Interim Director of the Bliss Institute of Politics and Professor of Political Science at the University of Akron. Recently, very recently, he was quoted with the headline in the New York Times. I welcome you back, Dr. Cohen, to guide us through the last hurrah of this election. So you have been a returning guest since at least 2006. And it seems like every election candidates say that this is the most important election in history. Let's start. Why is this election important?
Well, if it's not obvious to your viewers by now, I don't think it'll ever be obvious. It's the country is at the most polarized. This is the most polarized I've ever seen the United States of America. The last 4 years have been a bit of a roller coaster, to say the least. There's been more controversy, more crises, more controversies in the last 4 years that have happened than any period of time that I've ever witnessed in politics. And so, yes, you are exactly right. Every presidential election, people say, this is the most important election of your lifetime. And sometimes it's a bit of hyperbole, because really you've got two candidates that the American public will accept, the election will be over and we'll go on. You know, with this election, we're not even sure that after the election is over and the results are in, we're not even sure that, you know, a good portion of the American public are going to accept the election results. And one of the reasons is one of the presidential candidates is actively drawing doubt as to the legitimacy of the election. And so this is the most important election of your lifetime, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. I think most people feel that way. And I do think even in the midst of a global pandemic, which is the reason we're doing this via Zoom, I think you're going to see record turnout.
So you will. Okay, and I'm going to get to voting. But let me ask you, okay, so let's say we all agree that for whatever our reasons are, that this is the most important election in our lifetime and maybe in the history of this country. Why is Ohio so important? If he doesn't win Ohio, it's over, said the headline in the New York Times. So why is Ohio so important?
Well, you know, Ohio is crucial in the electoral math, especially for Donald Trump to win re-election. As I've told numerous reporters in this election season, Joe Biden would love to win Ohio, but he doesn't need to win Ohio. Donald Trump needs to win Ohio. Just the way that the electoral math works, if he doesn't win Ohio and our 18 electoral votes, it's very doubtful that he gets over the 270 electoral votes that are needed in order to get a majority of the electoral vote and win the election. If he doesn't win Ohio, it's almost a near certainty that means that he's also lost Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania as well. It's very possible that he's also lost Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, and Georgia. And if Donald Trump loses Ohio, if the dust settles and Ohio is gone and it's gone blue, it's very likely an electoral college route for the Biden campaign.
Wow. Now, Tom Friedman said the Presidential Commission on Elections should take time before each of the remaining debates, if they happen, to assure the American public of the safety of their vote. So I'm going to ask you, as a professor and as a director of the Bliss Institute, can you assure voters, whether they vote in absentee voting, whether they vote in early voting, or whether they go on election day, can you talk about the sanctity of their vote in this election?
Well, I can talk a little bit about Ohio. Ohio, luckily, has been doing absentee voting for well over a decade, and we're really good at it. I think that the record shows that when you vote in Ohio, whether it's absentee, whether it's early, which, by the way, early voting, I believe, starts tomorrow, and this is going to air later. So by the time it airs,
You will have started.
yeah, we'll already have started early voting. Or whether you vote in person, your vote is safe here in Ohio. Now, there have been concerns that have been raised because of changes that have taken place at the post office in just the last few months that have been initiated by a new postmaster general. He is very controversial. These changes are very controversial, and they seem designed to purposely slow down the delivery of the mail, which could affect people's absentee ballots. The great thing about Ohio is that you can actually check online. If you've applied for an absentee ballot, you can check to see if it's been sent yet, and you can actually track it through the mail process. If people have applied for an absentee ballot, those ballots will not go out until October 6th, and it may take a few days. Another nice thing about Ohio is we have drop boxes, which means that you can actually take your absentee ballot when you've finished it and you filled it out, and you can actually submit it directly to the boards of election so that you don't have to worry about sending it back in the mail.
Now, do they have to be received by what we used to call election day? Do they have to be received?
If you're dropping it off in the drop box, yes. If they're postmarked, there's a number of days that they can be received afterwards. But what I would suggest to all the viewers, if you live near a board of election, I would fill it out and I would drop it off in person at the board of election. You can either put it in the drop box or you can actually physically take it in to the board of election. And the nice thing about Ohio too is, unlike other states, those votes will be, they will open them up when they get them early. They will check to make sure there aren't any problems. If there are problems and if there's time, they will actually contact the voter and tell them, hey, there's an issue with your ballot. You need to fix this. Otherwise, your vote will not count, which is fantastic. A lot of states don't do that. And so, that's why I suggest to people do it as early as possible, get it to them so they can check to make sure that it's okay. And what they will do then is they will actually run them through the machine and they will put them in and then they will not press the button, which will tabulate the votes until 7:31 p.m. On election night. And we will find out almost immediately, over a period of time, over the next hour or so, what those absentee ballots are showing. As opposed to some states, they're not even allowed to open them up early. So Ohio does it right. We really do.
Okay. Now, in the last few days, some of the events that have unfolded are, the president is in the hospital with coronavirus. Several staff members are in the hospital or at least quarantined or isolated, I guess is the correct word, isolation after you have it. Can you talk to us about the 25th Amendment? Can you talk to us about, power and when and how it's decided if it gets passed on to someone else?
Sure. This has been on my mind. I think it's been on the mind of a lot of, academics and national security types. The 25th Amendment provides for a process if the president is incapacitated. And there's 4 sections in the 25th Amendment. The controlling sections are Section 3 and Section 4. In Section 3, if the president is ill or if the president knows they're going to be incapacitated, let's say they're going to have a medical procedure, In the past, it's been a colonoscopy. I think President Bush had 2 colonoscopies, and he transferred power over to Vice President Cheney. And that's done by the president having a letter, signing a letter, transmitting it to the vice president and the congressional leadership, and just letting them know, hey, I am temporarily transferring my powers. And then when the president is no longer incapacitated, he submits another letter to the vice president, the congressional leaders, and power goes back to the president. It's interesting, over the last several days, I've asked several White House correspondents that I know and other people that are, high up in places, and to their knowledge, no letter has been written yet by the president, which is a very serious thing because the president is on very serious drugs that can have a dramatic impact and have big side effects.
So for those people that say, well, what does it matter? No, you have a Congress, you have a vice president, you have a chief of staff, or you have a speaker of the House or whatever. Why does it matter if he's mentally or physically incapacitated?
Because if the president is incapacitated, it means the head of our government is not functioning. It means if there is, let's say, a serious national security issue that occurs, it means that the government really can't respond if the head of our government is incapacitated. If, let's say, the Russians or the Chinese or some other adversary of the United States decides to attack the United States, even God forbid with nuclear weapons, there's only a few minutes for the president to make a decision on whether we're going to retaliate. If they know that the president is incapacitated, we really have no ability to do that if the president is unable to make those decisions. And so it's very important under Section 3 that the president have that letter ready to go and to be able to, in just a matter of seconds, be able to transfer that power over to the vice president if, the president were to, suddenly, pass out or go into, just some sort of state of incapacitation. That's Section 3. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment is if the president becomes incapacitated without that kind of letter or the forethought of transferring power, Section 4 means that the vice president with the majority of the cabinet can petition to have the power taken away from the president and given to the vice president. And that also means not only a majority of the cabinet, it needs 2/3 of both houses of Congress. And this is a Congress that is not currently meeting. They don't have rules to make those kinds of votes remotely. And so they're not in DC. And so there would be a very long delay potentially with transferring that power, and the country could remain leaderless. And so it's a very serious situation. Most all presidents would have that letter in this situation ready to go. But from the reports that I've heard from my contacts, there is no such letter.
Is it an exaggeration when people talk about the Constitution is at risk? The country is burning. Is that an exaggeration, or is our Constitution our form of democracy as it is today, with a peaceful transition, with 2 terms? Is there anything that's really at risk?
I mean, I think our norms have been under fire for the last few years. The things that make a democracy function, the mutual trust that is necessary between political parties and leaders between parties. And it seems like every day there's another norm that is being shattered. The thing I've been most disturbed by over the last month or so during the presidential campaign is the fact that we have a sitting president that has actively undermined the American public's confidence in our electoral system. And I very much worry about the fact that should the election results show that this incumbent president lost, I am very worried that we will have civil unrest in our streets because you have millions of people that believe the president and believe that the election was somehow rigged or is illegitimate. And to me, it feels like we are at a turning point in history, and we could go one direction or the other. And so I can't really make any predictions on what's going to happen. All I can say is that I've been extremely distressed to see a sitting president undermining our institutions.
Today, we are looking at the upcoming election with the interim director of the Bliss Institute and professor of political science at the University of Akron, Dr. David Cohen. If your crystal ball worked, do you have any projections for November 4th?
All I can talk about is the state of the race right now, which is for a little less than a month out. And it looks very good for former Vice President Joe Biden. All the polls, the national polls, he's got a very large lead. And that lead has expanded since the first presidential debate, which really hurt President Trump and has really given a boost to Vice President Biden. And, debates really, often they don't give that kind of boost, but I think it's been unanimous that President Trump's performance was so out of control and so over the top that I think he turned off an awful lot of voters.
I think I did find, I was on a Zoom session, and I think I did find like the one person in America who did think it was Chris Wallace's fault, and not the president's.
Well, I tell you what, Chris Wallace had one heck of a challenge. I wish that Chris Wallace had done a better job trying to rein the president in, but the president was so out of control that night. I'm not sure that. I think actually Kristen Welker, who's supposed to do the third presidential debate, I look forward to seeing her because I think especially a female in that position, I think will really be able to hold those two candidates under control. Maybe it's my pro-female bias, but I just think that a strong woman in that position, I think, is just not going to let either candidate get away with anything. I am not sure, though, that we're going to see a second or third presidential debate. The president is in the hospital right now for COVID, and it's possible he could be released today or in a week. We just don't know. We don't know what kind of, whether he's going to be contagious a week from now or 2 weeks from now. The debates are coming up. If I were Vice President Biden, I certainly wouldn't want to be in a room, with him. It doesn't matter if it's 6 feet or 12 feet or 20 feet away. When you're in a confined indoor space, the chances go up that you could contract COVID. And we also know that COVID tests are not 100% accurate. And so we don't know if President Trump even gets tested and he's COVID free. If I were Vice President Biden, I certainly wouldn't trust that. They should be, and I've said this on social media, the third debate in 1960 was done with candidates in different cities. Jack Kennedy was in New York City, Richard Nixon was in Los Angeles. And they did the debate, it's like doing a Zoom debate. They can do it. The technology is a little bit better than it was 60 years ago. There's no reason that the candidates have to be in the same room. And I would not be surprised if the Biden people say, look, we've got to be in separate venues.
Can you weigh in on the, his base? Okay, one thing, Republican senators, congressmen, governors, why have they stuck with him through every undermining of every protocol, that we've had? Why have they stayed with him?
I think, first of all, I think Republican elected officials are afraid of Trump.
They're afraid of what?
I think they're afraid of being on the receiving end of a tweet. They're afraid of President Trump having his army of supporters turn on them. Because I think they have this exaggerated notion of the power of Trump's social media. And I think for most Republican officials, it's fear. What else explains how, a Senator Ted Cruz or Senator Marco Rubio or Senator Lindsey Graham, who were such huge critics of the president in 2016, in which the president said terrible things about them. Oh, and you can include Senator Rand Paul in this as well. Said such terrible things about each of these four individuals, and yet they are four of the most loyal people now in the Trump camp. And I just think it's fear.
So that leads me to, sometimes we forget that there are other elections. There are statewide elections and there are local elections, and sometimes we forget that. How possible would you say, and again, there's probably going to be a lot of October surprises, but how possible is it that the Senate will flip and will be Democratic? And then I'd like to go over some states individually with you.
Sure, I think it's extremely possible. I think, first of all, the Republican Party is defending many more seats than the Democratic Party is. The seats that could switch, they're all held by Republicans except for one, which would be the seat held by Doug Jones in Alabama, who's a Democrat. Other
So
than that,
Lindsey Graham versus Jamie Harrison.
yeah, that's a toss-up now. Nobody could have foreseen it as being a toss-up a year ago. But Lindsey Graham, is so unpopular in his home state of South Carolina. And Jamie Harrison is an excellent candidate. He's African-American, and he's really activated the African-American community in South Carolina. He's an excellent candidate. And so I think that he's got a really good shot at being the first Democrat elected in quite a while in South Carolina.
Let's look at Arizona, Mark Kelly versus Martha McSally. What does that look like to you?
I think right now it is definitely a lean Democrat. It looks like Mark Kelly, former astronaut and the husband of Gabby Giffords, who was almost murdered in an assassination attempt in 2010. I think Mark Kelly is going to win that seat against Senator McSally.
Now, McConnell versus McGrath. I took a class one time at the University of Akron, and I remember a professor said, no one in Kentucky likes McConnell, but he'll win. So McConnell versus McGrath, McConnell keeps his seat.
No one likes McConnell, but McConnell's probably going to win. Yeah.
And Montana and Colorado, it may have some tight races. What does that look like?
Yeah, Colorado, I think is going to go Democrat. I think Cory Gardner, the incumbent Republican, he's really behind in the polls. And John Hickenlooper, who was in the presidential race and dropped out to run for the Senate, I think he's a favorite. Montana, I think, is very much a toss-up. I think if Biden wins the election, I can definitely see Steve Bullock, who is the current governor and very popular and a Democrat. I can see him knocking off the incumbent Republican there.
Has the Lincoln Project had an effect on the election?
Oh, I really think so. I think the Lincoln Project, if you just look at their supporters on social media, if you look at the money they've been able to raise, if you look at how effective their ads are, their negative ads against not only Donald Trump, but also Republican senators, I think that the Lincoln Project has really made an impact. And it's basically created a home for people, for Republicans who are disaffected, who do not like Donald Trump, who want to bring the Republican Party back to where it was 10 or so years ago. Because right now, Donald Trump owns this party. It is the Trump Republican Party. And the Lincoln Project people want to bring it back to a vision of where they believe it should be, which is a more centrist party that has a much bigger tent.
Now, in one of my last questions, you're an expert on the Chief of Staff, writing a book on the role of the Chief of Staff.
Yep.
Can you comment, 4 Chief of Staffs in 4 years, what makes a good Chief of Staff? And do you agree, as some people are saying today, that Baker may have been the best Chief of Staff in recent
Yeah, I mean, I think Jim Baker is probably the model for White House Chiefs of Staff, or maybe Leon Panetta, a Democrat who served under Bill Clinton. What makes a good chief of staff? First of all, somebody that's very organized, somebody that's in command, somebody that has the president's respect, and also respects the president, and they have a good relationship. Somebody that is, the best chiefs of staff are both loved and feared in the White House. And just somebody that gets the job done and understands how power works in Washington. And I think one of the problems that we've seen with the White House Chief of Staff position in the Trump years is it really hasn't been the fault of the chiefs of staff that he's chosen. Donald Trump has never given his chiefs of staff the power that they need to actually do the job, because the president really needs to trust that chief of staff and must delegate power and authority to them. Basically, Donald Trump is his own chief of staff, and he's not a very good one. And he just doesn't like to delegate that power to really anybody. And so, Reince Priebus only lasted 6 months in his first chief of staff, which is a record for futility. Yes, some of that problem was Reince Priebus didn't know what he was doing, but most of the problem was the fact that Donald Trump really didn't give him the tools to succeed in the job.
In the remaining minute, I'm going to ask you for 1 or 2 word answers. Sitting here in 2020, can you tell us what the 2024 ticket looks like on both sides?
What the 2024 ticket looks like?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah, I think it'll be Mike Pence. Well, Mike Pence or Nikki Haley on that side. And, probably Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I think, if things continue today.
Okay. And one rising star in the GOP party.
I guess Nikki Haley.
One rising star in the Democratic Party.
Akron's own Amelia Sykes.
One rising star to look for in Ohio. I guess that answers.
Amelia Sykes.
Okay. To put elections into context, 87 countries in the world have free elections, which means the United States is one of 87 countries where we can freely vote. Dr. David Cohen joined us today to help us understand the short-term and long-term impact of the November election, the most important election in our lifetime. In this polarized world, perhaps the one thing we can all agree on is to vote on or before November 3rd. Thank you for joining us today, Professor Cohen. Thank you for joining us, viewers, on Forum 360 on PBS and Fusion Channel. I'm Leslie Ungar. Thank you for joining us for our global outlook with a local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Akron Community Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron, Blue Green, Electric Impulse Communications, and Forum 360 supporters.